Mr. Fry, as I stated, what is your position with the city?
I'm the part-time director of permits and development, and I also act as the housing officer.
And as the housing officer, I would take it that you're familiar with the state statutes and the city ordinances that pertain to community investment area and such.
I have reviewed those, yes.
There's been an allegation that the Northridge application was mistakenly interpreted as residential when it's actually a commercial property. And I want to get to certainly to the heart of that. In looking at the state statutes involved in making the determination of whether, say, a multi-unit dwelling is commercial or residential, are you aware of a part of the statute that indeed assists municipalities in making that decision?
Well, I certainly don't have those ordinances or those statutes memorized by any means. If you have something for me to look at, I would be happy to take a look at that and respond.
I'm going to give you a copy of 373566. I'll go ahead and give this to you as well, sir. And I'm looking at the last sentence of the first paragraph. Would you read that for us, please?
For the purposes of sections 3735.65 to 3735.70 of the revised code, whether a structure or remodeling composed of multiple units is classified as commercial or residential shall be determined by resolution or ordinance of the legislative authority, or
Sit down.
in the absence.
This is not a review. Just sit down.
Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Let me just start over. For the purposes of sections 3735.65 to 3735.70 of the revised code, whether a structure or remodeling composed of multiple units is classified as commercial or residential shall be determined by resolution or ordinance of the legislative authority, or, in the absence of such a determination, by the classification of the use of the structure or remodeling under the applicable zoning regulations.
Okay, and so to somewhat break down this legalese, am I interpreting this correctly that it states that the municipality may either designate the number of units for a dwelling in its ordinance to make the determination whether it's commercial or residential, and if it does not, if it's silent, then you look to how the use of the structure is zoned under the applicable zoning regulations. Is that
That's the way I read it. Yes, the local municipality can make that determination by resolution or ordinance, and if they don't, then you look to the use classification under the zoning ordinances.
And in your preparation for this hearing, I imagine you had the opportunity to look over York-Canton's ordinances as they pertain to the community reinvestment area.
Yes.
And in your view, has it made a designation for a number of units to make the determination whether it's commercial or residential?
I am not aware of any place in the ordinances adopting community reinvestment areas that the local municipality, North Canton City Council, dictated a certain number of units becomes commercial and or residential based on the number of units.
And so would it be correct then, the determination for whether or not it's commercial or a residential multi-unit dwelling is how it's zoned?
Yeah, based on the statute, it says if it's not done, which it doesn't appear that the city of North Canton has done that, then it would, that determination is made by the classification of the use of the structure or remodeling of the applicable zoning regulations.
Are you aware how the North Ridge parcel is zoned? And I believe it's actually in the allegation, but is it?
I believe it's on GBA, which is one of our general business commercial zones.
And so I'm going to pass the one out to you, ask you to look at this. You're familiar with this?
Yes.
document?
This is the scheduled permitted uses under our commercial zones that's contained in our zoning ordinance.
And this does show the designation for the general business area. Is that correct?
Yes, there are several different categories: office business district, Main Street business district, and then 2 different categories for general business district, GBA and GBB.
And in the general business area, does our local ordinance state a permitted use for residential multi-family dwellings?
It does. I might first point out that the land use categories are broken down into several different broad categories. You have residential, you have office and professional services, medical facilities, retail services, automotive, entertainment, etc. So it does have general broad categories. But under the residential land use category, multifamily dwellings is a permitted use within the GBA zone.
Okay. Are you also, in your preparation for this hearing, did you have an opportunity to look at documents related to construction and inspection of the property, and specifically what are called certificates of occupancy?
I have reviewed those, yes.
And in kind of layman's terms, can you tell me what a certificate of occupancy is?
Basically, when a construction project is completed, before it can be occupied by whatever the use is, whether it's an institutional use, a business use, a retail use, a residential use, it needs to receive the approval from the local building authority to say that it is safe and can be occupied for those purposes.
Does that form indicate who the local approving authority was for North Ridge Place?
Well, the says certificate of occupancy, City of North Canton. It is signed by what is titled the building official.
Okay. Do you recognize the signature there?
Yes, I do.
And whose signature is that?
R. Don Walker.
Thank you. Does the certificate of occupancy, and it's on the front and back, because there are 2 units there, does it indicate in a section entitled approved as whether this is a new structure?
Yes, up in the upper left corner of both documents, there's a couple of different sections that can be checked, and it appears that the new structure section has been checked with 2 X's, and none of the others are checked.
Okay. And does it give a description as to the occupancy for this structure as well?
Yes, just below that, it contains a description entitled occupancy groups. It states R2 residential, and then under the description it describes it as a 20-unit apartment. And it has that on both of these certificates of occupancy.
As well as preparing for this hearing, did you have the opportunity to examine the application for the CRA for Northridge?
I have reviewed those, yes.
And I'm going to ask you to look at the application, and on the second page, the first page is a letter to the auditor's office. The second page is actually the application.
Does the application identify what the applicant was seeking the exemption for?
Yes, there's 7 numbered items. Under number 4, it states exemption sought for. There's a couple of different boxes they can check for either new structure or remodeling. And under new structure, it is marked with an X. Under remodeling, it has the letters NA, which typically stand for not applicable.
Moment here.
So, as well as we had discussed in the state statute regarding approving exemptions for commercial, industrial, residential property, are you aware of any section there in the state statute that identifies approving authority that may be categorized for, as was alleged, for residential and separately for commercial and industrial properties?
Could you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Does our state statute identify approval authority for residential property and industrial and commercial properties? Is there a designation between the two?
You mean in the statute you gave me, or the statute in general that covers community reinvestment areas?
In general, there's I believe there's a specific one that gets to the point, I believe it's 671, gets to the point, and if you're familiar with that.
Once again, I've read the statutes, but I don't have those memorized.
Well, are you aware of whether or not a residential application, are you aware of who the state statute designates as the approving authority for
Okay, clarifying that question. Well, just as the appellant, Mr. Revolt, indicated in his testimony, he indicated that for commercial and industrial projects, that the city council is, or the legislative body is the approving body for those. However, the statute is different when it comes to residential properties, and it indicates that the housing officer has the approving authority for residential projects.
Is it correct that the housing officer is the sole approving authority for residential properties?
That is correct based on my understanding of this statute.
So based upon what you've seen thus far as the certificates of occupancy, I apologize, I'm going to try, as well as the application and the state statutes, as well as our local ordinances, do you have an opinion of whether or not the housing officer had the legal authority to approve the community reinvestment area application for Northridge as a residential project?
I do, and that, I believe that he did have that authority, and that is based a great deal upon the language of the statute itself, which states that in the absence of such determination by the legislative authority, which we've already covered, then by the classification of the use of the structure remodeling under the applicable zoning regulations. It does not state that it's based on the zoning itself, but on the classification of the use within that. In zoning, you can have a commercial zone, but have multiple uses allowed or permitted under that zone, such as residential, institutional, parks, commercial, etc. And the language of the statute in my reading, because it says by the classification of the use of the structure, not by the zoning, the use, as we've stated, it's spelled out under the ordinance as a residential use, and it's a permitted use within that commercial zone.
Any questions from members? Certainly for Mr. Fry.
The allegations, as I read it, are strictly that this is not permitted, an abatement is not permitted within the business district.
A residential.
A residential abatement, yeah, everything refers to business. Mr. Revolt alluded to another issue of 10-year, where this abatement had been granted for 12 years. That is not the question before us this evening, correct?
Well, certainly Mr. Revolt has raised that as part of his allegations that it was done improperly. Certainly, if the board finds that this was a commercial use, Mr. Revolt is absolutely correct that commercial uses, an abatement can only be granted for 10 years. Now, under the state statute, residential uses can be granted for either 12 or 15 years. And so some of that question as to whether 10 years is inappropriate hinges upon the determination first, is this a commercial property as Mr. Revolt has alleged, or is it a residential property as was approved? And that's for the board to determine.
I'm just reading the allegations and the all reference. It being business, not residential. And what I'm hearing from you gentlemen is that residential is permitted under our guidelines and the state statute guidelines.
I think that's how, based on how you read the ordinances, Mr. Revolt has certainly read it to mean the zoning classification. And as I read the ordinance, I read it to be the use. And certainly residential and commercial uses are different, as are commercial and residential zones. To me, the language of the ordinance statute says use as opposed to zoning, or zoning classification.
Okay. Mr. Fox, would you suggest we take action on this
Well,
at this point, or
well, I recommend that we do have the applicants have the opportunity as well as to respond. Just before we do that, however, I think it's important that Mr. Fry just had mentioned the ordinance that puts this in place. I'm going to give you a document here and see if you're familiar with this. I believe it was provided in many of the packages, and I believe this was the original community reinvestment area legislation, and the legislation that came afterwards, correct me if I'm wrong, simply increased the area for the Main Street CRA, but the terms and conditions had not changed. Am I correct with that?
That is my understanding. I have not compared the documents word for word, but that is my understanding that this ordinance 22-99 is the original granting document, and the others merely modified the area, but not the meat or substance of the
So they amended the original by increasing the Main Street size.
correct.
And in preparation for this hearing, have you looked at the ordinance to make a determination whether or not it appears that this was the intent of our council at that time to include new construction for residential property to be available to our residents that have parcels within the community reinvestment area.
Yeah, I mean, to know what the city council's intent was back in 1999, I can't say other than by reading the document that they have produced. And based on my reading of that, again, not only the whereas clauses, but also in several areas of there, it does talk about, it makes statements such as this city council has determined that the new construction and rehabilitation in such area would encourage stability, etc. Within the city CRA, new construction and remodeling of existing residential, commercial, and industrial structures are hereby declared to be public purposes. And so, based on just those few sections of reading that ordinance, it appears that they did intend for new construction to be included.
Thank you, Mr. Zellett. To your knowledge, this housing council, and I believe some of the members will be able to answer this as well, as they were members during this period of time. But the housing council, by state statute, is required to meet annually. Is that correct?
They do meet annually, correct.
And am I correct in that some of these here in the council, I believe the housing council met, discussed the Northridge tax abatement as early as, because it's a year afterwards that the abatement start. However, that initial meeting was in, I believe, March 30th, on about March 30th, 2016.
Well, I was not with the city at that time, so I can't speak to that specific date. However, as I conducted the Housing Council meeting in 2017 and placed the Northridge application on that for review, it had been reviewed previously at least one time by the Housing Council. That meeting is typically held in March of that year, so March of 2016 sounds appropriate for at least one meeting. Whether it was heard before that, I cannot say.
So what you're saying to me, Mr. Fry, is that wasn't been brought up to Housing Council, that abatement, as we were given the abatements when we met last March. I was not on the Housing Council. This is my first year on the council. So you would say, if we did a look back, that someone in these chambers has heard of this abatement, not waiting 3 years.
Correct. At least as early as March of 2016, if not earlier. But I can confirm that at least as early as March of 2016, the Northridge abatement was considered and actually approved to continue by the Housing
Already
Council.
that's approved by the law, that this is approved,
The housing officer had already authorized it, but it does come up for, I guess, annual continuation by the Housing Council, so long as it is meeting the
It was
conditions.
published record, maybe not within the 60, or what is the appeal date, 30 days, 60 days? 30 days. It wouldn't have necessarily come with the 30 days of the authorization, but it would have been sooner than the 3 years that were Mr. Rowell stating.
Correct.
I have this did not appear on our 2015 agenda. It first appeared, as you presumed, on March 30th of 2016. So that is the first action of continuation or approval that this council made. So 16 is, yeah, it wasn't on the 15 agenda, so.
I guess that we do have an expert that I believe Mr. Fry. There's been the allegation that the determination of whether a property is commercial or residential for CRA purposes is to be decided by how the auditor makes that declaration. Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, in my experience in looking at many properties throughout the city, this is not an uncommon occurrence where the auditor, based on their internal doings, the purposes that they have spelled out by statute, they will classify things for their purposes. That classification has no bearing on how the city zones it or what those use classifications are. We've already gone through some of that testimony about potential differences between the zoning classification and actual use. How or why the auditor defines it as such, I personally have told many other property owners that it doesn't matter what the auditor states it is. What our zoning ordinances and zoning classifications, et cetera, that's the determining factor. That's what our legislative body has spelled out. So, I respect and understand that the auditor may have some other designation, whether it's commercial, multifamily, they might list it as apartments. That's for their own internal purposes and has no bearing on the city of Nottingham.
Is it correct, as we had discussed a little bit earlier, specifically 37, 35, 66, the last paragraph, the last sentence of the first paragraph appears to state in making a designation whether or not a property is commercial or residential is the legislative authority in their ordinance, and then if not, am I correct in stating that the CRA statute makes the determination then to be how it's zoned, and we had discussed the permitted use for the GDA?
Correct. One way or the other, the legislative body of the city makes that determination, whether it's through the CRA ordinance or by default, the zoning ordinances and zoning classifications, et cetera. But it is not the auditor that makes that determination.
There was also the question of whether or not the application and the approval for the Northridge CRA, whether that was modeling or whether or not it was new construction. And we've kind of gone down this path and we've looked at these documents to see, well, this is actually a separate appeal. And so from your view of the application, can you make a determination whether or not the application was for new construction or for rehabilitation?
Well, based on the application that was then presented, number 4 clearly states exemption sought for new structure, and it's marked with an X. Remodeling has an NA, which once again typically stands for not applicable.
Okay. Now, on the back side of that form, and I guess we should look at that, it appears to be a form. It appears to be something that was printed out and then this was typed and it wasn't a computer generated and all of the information placed in there. Does it appear to you as you look at it that it's a form that may be used perhaps for rehabilitation?
I'm confused by your question.
Okay. If you look at the back side of the form, there's some lines that are drawn in there and then some things that are typed.
Yes.
It appears that that might be a form that's duplicated and then the information is typed in there. Some of that stuff will remain in the duplication.
Correct, yeah. It appears that it's a form to deal with any type of CRA application that comes in as opposed to a specific application for new construction, a specific application for remodeling, et cetera. It's just a general form, and that would be my interpretation of why there's, you know, ors and things like that.
And the housing officer cited to two specific areas of the state statute, is that correct?
That is correct.
And those two, what do those two relate to? Do they relate to rehabilitation?
Well, I don't have that section of the ordinance in front of me, and once again, I've read those ordinances, but I haven't memorized them, so.
Okay. I'm going to show you. This is that section of 37, 35, 67. And in the back, I'm going to ask you to look at sections D1 through 3. And one and, correct that 1 and 2 deal with rehabilitation, 3 or reconstruction?
If you would give me just a second, I will read those.
This one actually perhaps goes through 4, 1 through 4. This was perhaps the one for 2008. It was amended.
So as I have reviewed, quickly scanned those, it appears that D1 states there's some criteria for remodeling. Under D2, it appears that once again it sets out some additional criteria for remodeling. Section 3 talks about granting additional time if certain conditions are met, mainly that it's a historical nature. And D4 states that for construction of every month, so it does use different terminology than the others.
And you know that's effective in the back there, 2008. I'm going to point to this same statute for 2006, and then the sections for section D, where they had D1 through 4. Does it appear that that section has been amended by our state legislature?
Yeah, this most recent one we handed out, which as indicated is effective in 2006, it actually only has D1, 2, and 3. D1 appears to deal with remodeling, D2 appears to deal with remodeling, and D3 deals with construction. So it appears that there, between 2006 and 2008, there was a change to the state statute.
And is this change, does it appear that this renumbering in that section, it shifted what was D3 to D4, the new construction portion?
It appears that way, yes.
Are you aware of another amendment to 37, 35, 67, most current?
Yes, it's my understanding that that same section has been amended as recently as 2017, and it's eliminated 3 and 4 altogether, and now it just has D1 and D2, is my understanding.
D1 and D2. Okay. So as you view the application and for what its stated purpose is, in your view, is
it possible that, from what was presented to the Housing Council officer, as well as with the certificate of occupancy, I imagine there are some times where the housing officer would view the property specifically to present to the Housing Council. I guess what I'm getting at is it possible that the housing officer believed that placing 2 apartment buildings, multi-units, 20 units each, in place of what was the trailer park, that he believed that this was some sort of rehabilitation instead of new construction?
Based on all the documents from the certificates of occupancy, the actual application from Northridge, and the coinciding letter to the auditor, I don't believe that the housing officer thought that this was rehabilitation. It's clear throughout that he considered it new construction.
And this mistake, perhaps, in simply making a determination whether this was D1, D2, D3, D4 type of determination, in your research, is that perhaps common mistake, or perhaps just the term for that? What I'm passing out right now and introducing is it's called Baldwin's Ohio Practice, Local Government Law, Municipal. And are you familiar with Baldwin's Ohio Practice?
I'm not specifically familiar with it, but I know there's many law treaties out there that give further clarification and descriptions to ordinances and statutes.
Is it fair to call that a legal encyclopedia for research?
I suppose so, yes.
And what I'm handing out is a summary from Baldwin's Ohio Practice, where some, I guess what we would call legal scholars, but at least for research to help those that are unfamiliar with municipal practices, to help them in a brief period of time understand the process. And what's in this summary is called, the title, it's called Quick Reference Table to Tax Exemptions under 37, 35, 65 to 70. That's the title, correct?
Yes.
And the section that it has for new construction, what's the number that they're using there?
3735.67 D3.
D3.
Which complies with the one under the 2006 statute, but not under the 2008 statute. And based on the copyright date here of 2015 and or 2016, it appears that there's potentially some confusion here by this legal treatise as to what the statute.
Sure.
What numbers? Correct. I think what all of the information, the guiding information, such as minimum cost versus how long the abatement can go, all of that information is consistent throughout all of these. It's just that numerical reference to those that is getting confusing.
And so with these 3 amendments to the CRA statute, shifting from the D3, D4, and then just back to the D2, if you're not paying close attention, here we have some
some scholars in the legal treatise that have made a mistake, much akin to what's being alleged that the housing officer here in Brookhaven has made.
Potentially, yes.
And in your research, this has even been a slight gap by our Ohio Supreme Court. Is that correct?
I'm aware that there's, the Supreme Court has made comments about that.
Very good. The last allegation was made, and again, we did discuss this, the issue of an area that is owned GBA. And so I wish to touch again for the record that it's clear to you that the Northridge property is a parcel that's zoned GBA, is correct?
That is correct.
And that our local ordinance, one of the permitted uses is indeed residential multi-unit dwellings. Is that correct?
That is correct.
With some others here, just to be clear, I certainly made note of the allegations. They're similar to what we had before, and so, again, Mr. Fryer, our current housing officer, are you aware of what Mr. Osborne has alleged? Is it included in any state statute or any North Canton ordinances that the mayor approved of a community reinvestment tax abatement?
No, it's not. In fact, the mayor is not part of the legislative body, so he wouldn't participate in approving a commercial or industrial one, nor is he the housing, well, I guess the city could appoint the mayor as the housing officer, but in North Canton, he is not the housing officer, and therefore he has no authority to grant residential like the housing officer does.
And as we had discussed earlier, does the state statute provide that the appointed housing officer is the sole approving authority for a residential application for a CRA tax abatement?
That is correct. And in fact, they're actually not even given leeway. It says if it complies, then they shall forward on the application and approve that.
So if the application demonstrates that a parcel of land is located within the CRA area and the housing officer has determined that they've met their financial obligation according to the CRA, you're stating that there is no discretion that the housing officer must approve it?
That's my understanding of the statute, state statute, correct.
Thank you. The issue about, again, was raised that it's zoned commercial, and indeed it's a GBA. We had mentioned whether or not residential multifamily dwellings are permitted in the GBA zone district. Is that correct? Is it permitted use?
That is correct. Multifamily residential dwellings are permitted use in the GBA commercial zone. And as we have stated multiple times this evening, pursuant to the state statutes, it's based on the use and not so much the zoning classification, but the use within those zoning classifications.
Thank you. He also mentioned the purpose of our local ordinance is that these are for owner-occupied properties. In your research and preparing for this meeting, did you see any indication whatsoever of a requirement of owner-occupied properties?
I have not. The only indication in Ordinance 2299 states that new construction doesn't qualify any further than that.
Very good. And so in your review of the application from Northridge for new construction, as well as we had discussed a number of times this evening, how it's indicated on the certificate certificate of occupancy. In your opinion, is there any indication whatsoever in the documents that we looked at this evening, the testimony that we received this evening, that the intent for the North Ridge tax abatement was for rehabilitation and not new construction?
All the documents that I have reviewed, from the certificates of occupancy, the application, the enabling statute, all point that this is a new construction. And in looking at how the housing officer approved those, it's my belief that he understood that this was new construction and not rehabilitation.
One more question for you. If, say, the housing officer received an application for new construction, does he have the legal authority to make the determination that it's only for rehabilitation, or was his approval of that application deemed it's for new construction?
Could you repeat that question?
Yes. If the housing officer received an application and that application stated that it was for new construction, would the housing officer, in approving the application, have any authority to approve it for anything other than new construction?
He shouldn't. Based on that application, he should approve or deny it based on how the application is submitted.